The story of Spartacus is epic in every way. The gladiator who led a slave army to challenge the might of Rome. Even his admirers are larger than life. Karl Marx called him the most splendid fellow in ancient history. For Kirk Douglas, he was a slave dreaming of the death of slavery. The Spartacus legend has a powerful popular appeal, as cinema quickly spotted.
What intrigues me about Spartacus is how this man of lowly origin managed to more than hold his own for nearly 2 years against the might of the greatest empire of the ancient world. Yet this figure remains extraordinarily enigmatic, and I hope to put some flesh on otherwise very bare bones.
Spartacus lived in the century before Christ. Our slender knowledge of him comes from Roman writings, but they're concerned with his rebellion, not his personal history. They simply say he came from Thrace, present-day Bulgaria. In this brutal setting, organized resistance was almost impossible. Thracians, Gauls, and Germans were separated by language and culture. Their training divided them still further, setting man against man.
You would not want to befriend a fellow gladiator if you knew you were going to have to face them in the arena the next day, if you knew that to live they had to die. And yet, the history of Spartacus and his breaking out of the Capuus school with his fellow gladiators suggests that somewhere along the line, Spartacus managed to overcome that terrible problem of the gladiatorial school and to find a common bond.
Has persuaded over 70 fellow gladiators to make the bid for freedom with makeshift weapons.
Spartacus and about 74 companions broke out of his gladiatorial barracks. Now that happened almost exactly where I'm sitting now, maybe a few yards. We don't know the precise spot, but it was in a few meters of where I'm sitting. Using their initiative, they went straight to the cookhouse, grabbed as many cleavers and spits and other nasty-looking domestic instruments, and used those initially as weapons. The moment came, they saw their chance, overpowered the guards, and so started the Great Revolt.
The gladiators were not alone. Their camp on Vesuvius had become a beacon, attracting all those who had a grievance against Rome. Its social outcasts had long been bitter. Now, in Spartacus, they had found a figurehead.
Spartacus seems to accumulate a very mixed group of people. You've got a core of gladiators, then you've got runaway slaves. But you've then got the whole sort of rather unstable population of the area, the dispossessed, anyone who hasn't got a firm stake in the land gathers around the banners.
The numbers were swelling, but it was a motley band of runaways gathered in the rebel camp. The troops sent to quell the uprising can have had little foreboding.
When the first Roman force of 3,000 men arrived at Vesuvius, they will have been very cocky and overconfident.
And when they least expected it, Spartacus struck. Using ropes made from vines, he abseiled his entire force down the steepest face of Vesuvius to encircle the enemies.
He manages to get behind the Roman lines and then attacks their camp from behind. Now, because they're raw troops and they're not expecting this, they panic. I mean, the worst possible thing has happened. One moment they think they have Spartacus bottled up on a 4,000-foot mountain. The next second he's cut them off and he's assaulting their camp. And they obviously issue the famous order, run away.
Massive retaliation. A second force was sent, twice the size of the first. It carried before it the symbol of Roman authority, the fasces. This axe, tightly bound in a bundle of rods, represented Rome's power to enforce its laws through beating and execution. For the 6,000 troops marching behind it, this was the equivalent of a mission statement. The rebels were common criminals and to be dispatched accordingly. What followed for the Romans was humiliation. In a brilliant campaign, Spartacus not only destroyed their army, but seized the fasces from them. He had a more daunting problem forging together their national identities. From the first breakout, he'd faced dissent from the Gauls, or Celts, and the Germans under their leader, Crixus. These preferred pillage and plunder to marching and fighting. They'd reached an uneasy pact, but Spartacus knew his authority was precarious.
They had no ideology, they had no doctrine, no shared set of principles. So his leadership must always have been slightly tenuous. He's not a general in an institutionalized position. He's a leader who must retain leadership by force of personality, but the separate identity of the Celts Germans persists.
So Spartacus determined to give his slave army an objective in which all could share. They would not wait for the Romans. They would march north, fight their way over the Alps, and go home to freedom. One man finally took on the task. He had little experience in war, but was ambitious for high office. Marcus Licinius Crassus had a further distinction. He was the richest man in Rome.
Crassus we mostly see as a businessman or a speculator. He's famous for owning enormous amounts of property in Rome, tearing it down, putting up new houses, and becoming enormously rich. And Crassus is the man who says the definition of wealth is you have to be able to equip an army from your own resources.
Crassus had gold in plenty. But in Roman politics, one currency counted above all others: military victory.
When Crassus hears that Spartacus is down here, which is the exact point where I am now, right opposite Sicily, he probably rubs his hands with joy, because it looks to him as if Spartacus has walked into an absolutely perfect made trap. He's walked down here, marched down here, into the toe of Italy, into what was then called Brutium, and all Crassus has to do, and I say all and underline it massively there, is trap him and lock him in there and wait for him to starve.
The trap was truly monumental. What Crassus did was build a ditch and wall right across the toe of Italy to imprison the slave army. Defenses like these were the Roman army's stock in trade and had never been breached.
Crassus' position is incredibly strong. His army have constructed a magnificent fortification across this isthmus, so he is in a very strong position, and he probably thinks that this is impregnable, that Spartacus will come up and will probably attack it, but will beat himself to pieces on it, just as the waves do on the rocks.
In his first assault on the wall, Spartacus was thrown back. 6,000 of his men were killed. But his bloody-mindedness matched that of Crassus. He determined to show his own army the price of failure. The Roman punishment for rebellious slaves was crucifixion. It was a slow, painful, and humiliating death. Now Spartacus took a Roman prisoner, and in full view of both armies, had him nailed to the cross.
This is the type of nail that was used. This, in fact, is a 2,000-year-old 7-inch Roman iron military nail. These were driven through the arm about here, not through the wrist, not through the hand. And to make sure that they stay in, a small wooden plug or washer is put over the area first, and then the nail driven through like that. The third and final nail, again with its little acacia wood washer, is hammered through the back of his ankles, straight through both of them. As the body sags, the pressure is enormous on the rib cage, and he will attempt to relieve this pressure by standing up on his feet. In other words, standing up on this nail that's been driven through his ankles, and that will take the pressure off his lungs and he'll be able to breathe again. After some time, of course, the pain becomes absolutely unbearable and he will collapse and the process will start again. Now this, of course, is supposed to be a long-term punishment. This Roman soldier, who will have been a fit man, could last for at least 72 hours. This was an incredible achievement. Spartacus has carried out an unheard-of military feat. He's on his way north again.
But at the point of his greatest triumph, Spartacus had run out of options. To his followers, he seemed invincible, a gladiator who had made the whole of Italy his arena. But even the largest arena offered only one choice: to fight or die. Hemmed in by 3 Roman armies, his fate was sealed. Once more, his troops clamored for Roman blood. Once more, it made them reckless. Once more, German slaves arrogantly demanded they fight separately and were promptly slaughtered by Crassus. 35,000 were killed. Spartacus was now outnumbered by the Romans, but his followers were undeterred. They demanded that he lead them into battle again. They'd had 9 straight victories over their Roman masters. They'd twice marched the length of Italy. The higher the odds, the more they wanted battle. And once more, Spartacus was captive to their wishes.
This is a battle he has not sought, he does not want. But unfortunately, they are intoxicated by success. They feel they are supermen. This man, Spartacus, has led them to superhuman achievements, and they frankly overrule him.
This is the valley of the river Silarus, site of the final resistance of the slaves. It was the battle that Crassus desperately needed to claim the triumph as his own. Spartacus stood his ground, even when his men fled. Struggling to get to Crassus, he killed 2 centurions outright, but was finally hacked down, still fighting.
Here was one of the most outstanding commanders of the ancient world, a man who came from absolutely the very bottom, the lowest dregs of the gutter, rose up, built an army from scratch without any assistance virtually at all, and took on the world's finest army and held it at bay for 2 years.
The Romans recovered the trophies taken by Spartacus in his 2-year struggle. 5 legionary eagles, 26 standards, each representing victory for him, humiliation for them. They recovered the fasces, and with it, the authority of Rome. But, we're told, what they didn't find on the battlefield was the body of Spartacus.
The image of the missing body is part of the myth creation of a legendary figure. Spartacus is both reality, a rebellious general slave who is miraculously effective as a leader of slaves, of gladiators, of peasants. But also he's a symbol of barbarian strength, a warning of what might happen to Rome. In the end, if we're not careful, the people whom we defeated will defeat us. And of course it happened. It took 4 centuries, but it happened.
Spartacus is a legend of the Romans' own making. It was they, the slave masters, who set down the history of his slave revolt, and they, the victors, who assured the enduring memory of his defeat. For the Romans, he was a bogeyman. What they couldn't anticipate was that for us, Spartacus would become a hero and the ultimate symbol of resistance to Rome. But it was the Roman response after the final battle that sealed the memory of his slave uprising. Denied the body of Spartacus, Crassus took the surviving rebels back to Capua, where the revolt had started. And from there, along the Appian Way to the gates of Rome, he crucified all 6,000 of them.
This was really the Roman equivalent of the M4 or the M1. Hundreds of people would be travelling up and down this road every day. And after all, not only were they going to see 6,000 bodies between here and the capital, they would see those 6,000 bodies for the next 3 months, because the bodies were not taken down and buried. They were just allowed to rot and finally disintegrated. This is, yes, the end of a extraordinary, but ultimately a story riddled with pathos and sadness at the end of the day.